Tin Journal continues.
Christopher Hitchens, go ahead. You can drink the water.
Okay, I just didn't want people to open on a swig, but I'm actually...
That's okay. We'll show the book as you... it's Evian water.
It's Evian water.
Letters to a Young Contrarian. Why'd you write the book?
By all means, yeah, wave it more. Actually, I wrote it because I was invited to. Some of your viewers, maybe you too, were given when they were young, I'm sure, Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, the great German poet who received these touching letters from a young man who wondered if the poetic life could be lived or was worth leading, and he replied. And it's an exquisite little book, putting one's own efforts rather in the shade, but the idea of Perseus Books was to see if we could do this again. So, for example, you'll be thrilled to hear Jessie Norman has written Letters to a Young Diva, advice to someone who might want to emulate her. There's Letters to a Young Lawyer, I believe, and then me for those who are vaguely malcontented and might want to transfer their discontent into some sort of energy or perhaps into writing. So very tentatively, because it marks my definite accession into middle age, you don't get asked to write for the young unless you've become old. You have to face it. I write to, actually the people I write to are real. They're my students at the New School in New York where I teach part-time, and other students I've had in Berkeley and other places. So I always have someone in mind who's actually asked me a specific question. One
of the people you write about, Václav Havel, why'd you include him in the book, and who is he, for those who are not familiar with him?
Václav Havel is the president now of the Czech Republic, and he was the president of Czechoslovakia before it defederated itself, when it became again a free country in 1989 with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and of the Stalinist system. And the reason why I take him as an exemplary case is that he's a man who organized a massive national and civic resistance completely non-violently, completely successfully, just by writing, and writing ironically and teasingly about the self-evident absurdity of the system he was living under. And incredibly, it just fell down, you know, and it was brought down basically, I mean, it's exaggerating slightly, and it's a vaguely romantic way of putting it, but it's not really untrue. It was brought down by poets, playwrights, and essayists, and authors. So the way that he lived that life and made words into weapons has always struck me as an absolute fabulous 20th century story.
Christopher Hitchens will be with us till the top of the hour. Our phone lines are open. They are divided regionally, and if you're watching us overseas or in Mexico and Canada, 202-628-0205. You refer to a man by the name of Santiago Alvarez, who you describe as the grand old man of Cuba cinema. Film was the special medium of the Cuban Revolution, and as he assured us, was unfettered, completely unfettered. Well, he said with a slight laugh, there is one thing that is not done. No satirical portrayal of the leader will be permitted, referring to Fidel Castro. Yeah. I said quite simply that if the main subject of Castro was off limits, then, in effect, there could be no real satire or criticism at all.
By the way, I'm incredibly touched that you've got underlinings and notes in the margin and so on.
I've read it.
Thank you. And you'll agree, it's quite short and it's very reasonably priced and very nicely packaged. The perfect Thanksgiving and Hanukkah gift. I'll only have to say this once now.
We'll keep showing the book. I want to ask you about the photograph, too.
Yes, Santiago Alvarez, who I believe is still with us, was the author of a lot of very punchy, colorful, polemical Cuban films in the early 60s, the time when Cuba was considered a very exciting place, and not just on the left, and where a large number of very, very good film directors were then more or less free to work. Anyway, I went to Cuba in 1968 as a young leftist, and I was very interested to see if their claim was true. The Cuban claim was, our revolution is not going to be like Mao Zedong or Stalin, it's going to be different. It won't end up a kind of grey, conformist regime. So a lot of us were excited that we thought this could be true. And what I'm writing about here for my younger audience is, you know, what to do when you encounter disillusionment in a sense. I was very thrilled to invite to a seminar with Santiago Alvarez, whose films I'd seen. And I said, well, talk more about it, and then he said, well, we're very free here, it was very unfettered, there's only one limitation, you don't make jokes about the leader. And I said, well, Mr. Castro seems to be a kind of big factor in this revolution, so if you're leaving him out, he's off limits. That's not a detail, is it? And people began to look at me as if I was being uncooperative or disloyal, and it was a sort of early warning to me. Because unfortunately now, I mean, the Cuban cinema, there is still a Havana Film Festival. People do still go to it, but all the life and colour has gone out of Cuban cinema, and indeed of the Cuban Revolution. It's a tragedy.
As you well know, there's a meeting going on today with Karl Rove, the senior advisor to the president, and some of Hollywood's executives. What role do you think Hollywood can play in what we're seeing in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world?
Good grief, none, I hope. I'd like to think I have an answer to any question you could possibly ask me. I haven't thought about this one, but I can't think that Hollywood can be much help either way.
Well, let me go back to your words, and then we'll open it up to calls. You conclude your book by saying, and this may summarize the essence of the book, the high ambition, therefore, seems to me to be this, that one should strive to combine the maximum of impatience with the maximum of skepticism, the maximum of hatred, of injustice and irrationality with the maximum of ironic self-criticism. This would mean really deciding to learn from history rather than invoking it.
It's not bad. It's quite well put.
So what's the message?
Well, the message is to try and live your life as if you were a free person, that you didn't have to wonder what anyone else's opinion was, that you should take the risk of believing that if you're the only person who thinks what you think, that still might well mean that you were right. In fact, though that loneliness often makes people wonder, because perhaps out of modesty they feel, well, if I feel this way and everyone else doesn't, maybe I'm crazy, or maybe there's something they know that I don't. I'm trying to encourage people not to think like that. You'll notice sometimes on chat shows, I'm sure, and call-in shows as well, people will often say, well, as so-and-so was just saying, and as I quite agree, and they're nervous. They don't want to speak in their own voice. They won't ever quite come out and say, this is what I think. What I'm trying to give people the confidence to do, in other words, is to not only think that even if you're the only one who thinks it, it could be true, but to imagine that actually, if the majority thinks one thing, it's more likely than not to be wrong.
Where was the picture taken?
The picture was taken in a studio in Georgetown earlier this year, just by the canal.
And how many packs of cigarette do you smoke?
It's a shameful admission. It depends on how long the day is, really. I mean, if I have a long day, I can go to 3 packs, which is, it'll kill me. I don't put advice to the young of any other kind in my book, but if there's anyone watching who is young, who does smoke, if they can stop now, they really ought to try.
Would you if you could? Or
sure,
have you tried to quit?
I would. I think temperamentally, probably I'm meant to do it. I mean, some people are, and some writers, I think, have a relationship with both alcohol and nicotine that's creative destructive, but it's somehow, it's part of one's curse. I'm one of those. I can also handle it, but anyway, I mean, we mustn't get too pious and depressing on a Sunday morning, but if anyone's thinking of taking it up, definitely don't.
Detroit, good morning for Christopher Hitchens.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. I have a son who I spent an hour on the phone with yesterday arguing about what's going to happen to the world, and he is probably personifying a lot of that last paragraph. Oh. And I wanted to know, really get onto this. He says that the crux of the situation is that no one has any ethics anymore, and that evil is going to beat good, and no matter how much we try, although he's very much in favor of fighting injustice and inequality and a very liberal person, he's got a real defeatist attitude right now. He's 23, he's in medical school, and I think he kind of personifies the younger generation right now, and I'm very worried.
Well, don't give up. Don't give up so easily, for one thing, and for sure don't give up on your own son. Let me see if I can encourage him, and perhaps you. I'm presuming that by evil and good you're referring to the current clash, okay? I'll make that assumption. This may sound awful, but I found a certain sense of exhilaration on September the 11th, which has not left me since. I thought, now